We have with us Dierk, who is the manager of the globalization systems and infrastructure at HubSpot. He will be talking about the HubSpot localization history. So Dierk, welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. All right, so my presentation is called Finding Your Feet When Going Global. It is basically going to be part case study and part making the case for a somewhat unique positioning of an internal localization team in an enterprise company on the localization buyer side. The main areas that I'm going to be talking about are HubSpot's localization team setup, as well as our tech stack, and then how we have positioned our team to really extend localization as a function into more of a system of globalization enablement. All of this, of course, is going to be seen through a HubSpot specific lens, but I'm hoping that we can arrive at some sort of generalizable takeaways that allow others to draw on our experiences. First up, a couple of words about HubSpot itself. If you're not familiar, HubSpot is a publicly traded SaaS company operating out of Cambridge. That's where our headquarters is. We're offering marketing, sales, service, CMS, and CRM software. Now, that's quite the lineup. It didn't always used to read that long. We started out with a marketing focus only and have over time added more and more to our offerings. Similarly, we started out focusing very much on small and medium-sized businesses, but have now entered the enterprise market as well. The approach that we've taken with our software is that we offer an all-in-one platform. The idea being that customers get one platform, one tool that they can use to basically run most of their business critical processes on. And because everything is on one platform, those processes can sort of inform each other. All of the tools are natively integrated with each other. And this, of course, helps with data transfer, with reporting, and so on. We also work extensively with partners all over the world. Those could be agencies and freelancers offering their services in working on our platform, but it's also resellers, sales coaches, and app partners who offer third-party integrations to our platform. We are currently at slightly over 400 integration partners. HubSpot is also known for developing and championing the inbound methodology. I'm not going to go into that in any detail here because that would be too much for the scope of this presentation. But if I had to summarize it very briefly, the idea behind the inbound methodology is that all of these, the business processes in marketing, sales, and services that are directed at customers should all be done in a consumer-friendly manner and should be done in a manner that is the least intrusive and disruptive for the people that they're being targeted at as they can be. So if you wanted to have a reductive version of this, it would be sort of content marketing plus, I guess. HubSpot has around 78,000 customers in over 120 countries. We have over 3,500 employees, out of which roughly 500 are full-time remote. And when there isn't a pandemic going on, we operate out of 10 offices worldwide. Based in 9 countries, we have actually 2 offices in the US. Right now, the entire company obviously has switched to a remote setup. The localization team at HubSpot was only established in 2014. HubSpot itself was founded in 2006, so it took us quite some time to really make the first hire, dedicated localization hire. One thing that is a little bit unusual in the way that we did this is that we hired from the top. So most of the time on the buyer side, localization kind of grows organically from the ground up, because at some point the need arises and some people just start doing it, and it takes some time before some actual localization specific positions and teams are formed. In our case, we kind of did it the other way around. The first hire on the team was our VP, hired from externally, because we did not have a whole bunch of localization experience in the company at the time. At this point, the team consists of 18 members, 10 linguists, 5 PMs, 2 managers, and our VP. We report directly into the Managing Director for International Operations, who is seated directly under our Chief Customer Officer and the CEO. So we have a very short line of communication all the way up to the C-suite, which is a very important aspect in our setup. We are part of the core organizations of sales, marketing, and customer success, which really allows us to use localization as a strategic lever to get these processes moving as best they can. As far as the team structure goes, the first hires that we made on the team after we had the sort of the management question out of the way were localization specialists. So those were our sort of first on the ground team members, and really what we were looking for mostly were all-rounders who could fill any role that they needed to and deal with any problems, any tasks that came their way as needed, because the company was rapidly expanding, rapidly growing internationally, and it was really sort of a very startup-y kind of environment. Our CEO calls that scale up. Because we're too big to still be called a startup, but we've kind of retained that kind of environment. Over time, we have started to develop more and more specializations on the team. Those can develop into standalone roles as well. That was the case, for example, with my role, which kind of developed out of a focus on the tech side of things. And yeah, this is something that we're looking to continue more and more. With more and more future specializations opening up. Roughly speaking, the divide between linguists and PMs that most localization teams have in our case is centered around the linguists really becoming subject matter experts, A, on all things HubSpot, but B, also like how we want our brand voice to sound for their given language and market. And they work closely with both the marketers for those regions, but also our external vendors, and I'll talk about that in a second. The PMs, on the other hand, we really want to be our enablement vectors, and they are the ones really driving the interaction with internal stakeholders that we have all over the company. If we look briefly at our content, the roughly 60% of our content that we work with is marketing based. Then we have another roughly 20-ish% or so in product. That means like software localization, and then another 20% in support services, sales enablement, and so on. We localize into 5 core languages: German, Spanish, French, Japanese, and Portuguese. Although we do have some secondary languages as well. But we don't have dedicated in-house resources for them. For those, we rely exclusively on vendors. We localize roughly 2 million-ish words per quarter, using a hybrid model of outsourced translation and our internal team, who is mostly focused on review. As I mentioned before, we're working very closely with our vendors, and this is mostly due to how localization sort of developed at HubSpot, because we initially had the kind of all-rounder role as for the localization specialists who really had to fill any role and deal with any tasks that came their way. We naturally developed very close working relationships with our vendor resources, that meaning especially the translators and the reviewers on the vendor side. And our internal linguists kind of fulfill the role as coaches for those resources, many of whom have been on our account for multiple years and really know HubSpot as well as anyone who isn't actually employed by HubSpot can. One thing that we value very highly here are short communication lines. So we're all on instant messaging, Slack, with our vendor resources, and we want them to feel comfortable in coming directly to us and asking questions if they have any. A lot of time, localization buyers have the tendency to create a whole bunch of rules and processes around, especially around query management, which can have the tendency that you create a higher sort of barrier to entry, which may lead to translators and reviewers not actually speaking up when you really wish that they would, because any question that they don't ask is an answer that you don't give. And that means like next time a problem like that or an issue like that pops up, they don't know how to solve it. One pretty cool initiative that I just wanted to call out here was our Translator Summit in 2017, where we flew all of our external translators and reviewers that were working with us at the time to our EMEA headquarters in Dublin for 3 days of workshops, of presentations, and basically just a full-on immersion course in all things HubSpot. I mentioned before that we see localization as a bigger role than it often is. We don't just focus on the sort of production, the day-to-day production of localizing content. Of course, that's the core of our work. But beyond that, we really have a function as a globalization enablement team, which means that we really lean into the fact that we work with everyone. Localization is by its very nature a cross-functional. It needs to be. And we want to make ourselves open to that approach as much as we can. Our CEO calls that having open APIs that other teams can easily sort of plug into and connect with. And part of that is also allowing for different levels of engagement. So if another department comes to us and a manager comes to us and asks really just for a consultation, that's totally fine. If a manager from let's say a marketing team comes to us and asks for a full-on, everything from the initial translation all the way to multimedia and publication, multimedia sort of management and publication, that's absolutely doable as well, and everything in between. One thing that we really focus on a lot is we're trying to be as proactive as we can, because HubSpot is still growing very fast. It is still an environment that is not quite as startup-y anymore, but it still has that the company still has that nature. It still has that company culture. We have the benefit that you can talk to anyone at HubSpot about pretty much anything. And this involves actively looking for opportunities to get involved, actively looking for new stakeholders in the company. So for example, if we have multiple internal newsletters in the company, and if we, for example, see that on, I don't know, let's say the product marketing team, a new manager has joined for the EMEA region, then we would probably want to schedule a meeting with that person just to let them know how that we're here for them if they should need our services, and that they can talk to us and work with us anytime. One aspect that we get to do as part of this, and this is something that I personally am very excited about, is that we also get to feedback and inform product development itself. So HubSpot we use our own tools as much as possible. So we host our content on our own CMS. We use our own CRM for sales and services and so on. And as part of that, we as the localization team, we have become sort of a power user, and we are spearheading the multi-language use case of our own tools. We're certainly, an enterprise level user for those tools, and as, in that function, we can help to uncover customer needs that maybe we are not fully meeting yet, and we can help inform the product team's user research, as well as help out in user acceptance testing for new apps, new features. On the flip side of that, we're also looking to involve other people as much as we can in our initiatives. One recent example of this was the launch of our Dutch UI localization, which we launched roughly 2 weeks ago, a bit more. And as part of this, we actually created an internal browser extension that that users can use to very quickly and easily report bugs straight to our team. When they submit a bug, our team gets a notification, and we can get going on that bug. The reason for this really was that, as I said before, Dutch is not a language that we have dedicated in-house resources on the localization team for, but we do have plenty of employees who speak Dutch. So this was a good way in order to involve them and have them, really use those resources and have them help out. Of course, in order to be able to facilitate such an approach, we need a flexible tech stack, which you can see here. This is sort of a trimmed down version. I'm kind of omitting the software localization side here, but it's really just meant to get the principle of how we think about our localization tech stack across. HubSpot is listed in the middle here because, as I said, we're using our own tools as much as we can. And since we're hosting all of our web content on our own CMS, it is the major content repository that we have to work with in localization. If there's any sort of theme, I guess, to our localization tech stack, it would be number one, a maximum of control. We want to be able to control our tech stack as much as possible, and two, flexibility. So if something changes, if new features get released on the platform that we need to work with, that we need to integrate into our workflows, for example, we want to be able to do that as quickly as possible. On the translation side, our major tools are memoQ as our cat tool and KantanMT for machine translation processing. Machine translation is something that we currently really only use on our support documentation. Our memoQ setup is slightly unusual, I would say, because it is our instance of memoQ, our server, but we have our external resources, our vendors and freelancers working on our server. So we provide all the setup for them. We provide licenses for them, and we basically give them project templates, project configurations, and they can work with those resources on our server. On the project management, project tracking side, we use Jira as our sort of source of truth for pretty much anything. Jira is where we communicate with our internal stakeholders. Pretty much any localization project starts and ends in Jira. We use Jira for data reporting, for budget tracking, and everything that is sort of on the organizational side goes into Jira. Over the past, I would say 2 years or so, we have also really started to build our reporting capabilities, for which we use Looker as a BI platform. We basically draw on the data that we have in all of these other platforms that you see here, and use that in Looker for our reporting. And those of you who know those tools might now say, well, hold on a minute, some of these aren't usually connected. And that's where this last tool, Workato, comes into play. Workato is an iPaaS platform. If you're not familiar with the concept, iPaaS stands for Integration Platform as a Service. These are, you might have heard of services like Zapier or If This Then That, Automate.io, things like that. And we basically use this platform as a way to connect all of these different tools in our tech stack. And using that approach, we have built a system of custom in-house connectors. So there's definitely an element of custom engineering to our tech stack. And that is because, as I mentioned earlier, we want it to be as flexible and as malleable as it can be. So if anything changes or needs to change, we can adapt quickly. And it is fully under our control how we adapt to it. So as I said, we have built a whole set of custom connectors that we collectively refer to as Leo the Lion, personified as our unofficial team mascot here. And these connectors, these automated workflows, really allow us to do a whole host of things, starting from fielding localization requests from internal stakeholders, funneling them into Jira, automating the transfer of content, the source content from the HubSpot CMS into memoQ, the translated content from memoQ back into the CMS. It allows us to automate external communications. It allows us to generate quotes based on word counts in memoQ. It allows us to sync data between our tools and to surface it for reporting in Looker. The areas that we're focusing on right now and that I'm focusing on right now are, number one, like improving what we already have, further automating and streamlining processes. We're always basically on the lookout for new opportunities there. And we're also looking more and more into preparing playbooks for sort of bigger changes, bigger scenarios that that might be coming up. So let's say if we decided to add, another 4 languages in 2021, not that we've decided to do that, just as an example, we want to be as ready as we can for that, so that when the time comes, we basically just have to flip the switch and we can, we can act on those use cases as they pop up. Increased flexibility is always something that we're striving for as well. MT is one big part of that. It's definitely something that where we want to have to sort of broaden our options more and more as we develop our tech stack more. I mentioned before that reporting has been a focus over the past 2-ish years. And what we're really focused on here, apart from, of course, we do have all the, the standard metrics that localization, that are the usual metrics in localization, word counts, project number, project duration. But what we're really looking for is, we're really looking to find ways to communicate the value that localization brings to the table, with metrics that go beyond these usual metrics, because word count doesn't really mean much to someone who isn't intricately familiar with localization already. And if I'm a C-suite executive, the fact that we process 2 million words per quarter doesn't, it sounds big, but it doesn't really tell me what is actually being achieved here. So we have been fortunate enough that localization is part of our executive leadership meetings for international operations. And we also do quarterly business reviews with all of our internal stakeholders. So if there are any issues that they see, any feedback that they have for us, we can take that on board. If there are any metrics that they would want to see, that's definitely always something that we're interested in as well. And then we also use both internal and externally, we send out surveys to field feedback from stakeholders as well as from users. So we have integrated survey capabilities in the HubSpot platform, and that is something that we want to leverage as much as we can in order to gather feedback from our users. Some sample reports, like this is from our Looker instance, for example. This is what our PM capacity scoring looks like, which is just sort of an indicator boiled down to a single number where we can get a rough estimation of how busy our PMs are, and then you have standard reports for project volume, word count, and so on. So nearing the end of the presentation, I'm looking to come up with some generalized takeaways, and this is just what we have found success with at HubSpot. So it doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. And one thing that is definitely needed for this kind of approach to internal localization, and positioning to an internal localization team, one thing that's needed for this to work is executive support, which I would always value very, very highly for localization. It's not always there on the buyer side, but if you can get it, if you can get yourself a champion in executive management, that is that it's worth its weight in gold. And 2 is a company culture that is conducive to this sort of approach. We couldn't work the way that we do if HubSpot's company culture wasn't what it is. So if our company culture wasn't as open as it is, as as transparent as it is, if those weren't the values that we have as a company, we probably wouldn't be able to position ourselves as we are. So my takeaways are, we would generally recommend broadening the profile of internal localization teams as much as possible, and not think of it as quote unquote just localization, however you want to define that, but really think of it as a team that can help with global enablement, that can help shape how companies expand internationally. One important way to achieve this is really to trust in your team, and give them the opportunity to develop the really their interests in doing this. So if someone really wants to go, if someone really says, like, I want to make our product localization as streamlined and as good as it can be, I want to make sure that our translators have all of the information coming all the way from product design, and that's something I'm really passionate about. We definitely want to give them the opportunity to pursue that interest, and that only works if you're fostering a nature of proactivity and collaboration, and if you are flexible in how you engage with your internal stakeholders, and really give them the option to work with you in any way that they prefer. All right, that's all I have for today. I'd be happy to take any question if there are any.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Yes, we have received some questions. So let me ask you, I think we have the time for at least 2 questions. The first one we have received is from Nino, and she asks, do you encounter 255 character path limit with Microsoft when working with UI strings and packages? And how do you tackle this limitation when working with complex folder structures?
Yes, so we have encountered it every now and then. It's not been a huge pain point for us by any means, so because it's not something that happens regularly for us, we don't really, there's no really sort of a programmatic solution to it that we're using. If it happens, we basically just have to go in manually and rename. That's pretty much how we would be handling that. But honestly, like, I've been at HubSpot in localization for roughly 4 years, a bit more than that, and I can think of maybe a handful of times that this issue has come up. So it's not a big issue for us, I'm afraid to say.
Okay, and then we have received not 1 but 2 questions about your integration with Jira offline. We asked just a general question, and Yuri also shares that he used it internally, but it's tough to engage translators.
I don't know. We haven't found it's tough to engage translators. I think part of this is on our localization manager, who is really a strong advocate for Jira, and really really focuses on pointing out the value that brings. But for us, Jira was a pretty natural fit because it was a system already in use at HubSpot. We basically just tapped into that, and it is a platform that most people at HubSpot are familiar with, at least to a degree that they know how to use it, and that they know how to communicate using it. So it was a very natural fit for us in order to have like a single platform that we can use to communicate with our internal stakeholders.